Next introduction to this panel. Murray is having a sleep or something. He gets to it after a while at this time of life. There's not much to say about this gentleman who's going to host this panel. You've seen him several times today if you'd never seen him before in your life, and if you live in this country, you have. You'll all know that he's one of our finest and most loved, if you like to put it that way, broadcasters. There he is, the avuncular Mr. Bob Holness.
There have been the odd occasions where... Is that right? Okay, then I won't say any more. I shall in fact say welcome back to the two gentlemen who I'm delighted to be talking to for the next hour, Bill and Lennie. Bill Russo, Lennie Niehaus. They get fitted up. Just to tell you in advance that after this comes presentation 3, the Kenton trombones with Milt. That's from 4 o'clock. Milt, it says, who speaks with inside knowledge. You all right there? Want to open for you? You look, oh. Right. I'll have a blue. Every time I come up here to this table...
That's why I let you do it.
You get around more than I do. Now, the chat is going to start, and I know they're probably going to dread this very thing. The chat is going to start. He would, yes. I'm aware that many of you, and I mean this quite sincerely, many of you will know the background of both of our guests this afternoon, but there may be some people who don't. So I'm just momentarily, for the first part of the chat, going to dig back into family history. I'm sorry about this. I know you've said it dozens and dozens of times.
I've heard it.
But can we first of all just talk about the fact that you both come from musical families? Lennie, you first. You started playing the violin at the age of 8?
Yes, my father was a violinist, and my first instrument was the violin. And my father was from the old school where you played, and if you played incorrectly, he hit. And you know the movies with the guy with the yardstick hitting the piano players across the fingers, and they wonder why they can't play an arpeggio or whatever. But a beginning violinist has a habit. It's very awkward to do this. It's the way to play a violin. And so naturally your arm has a tendency to do this. So my father kept saying, you know, do this, and it kept veering this way. And one day he hit my thumb, and the fiddle fell on the floor, and it broke, and then he hit me. And that was the end of my violin days.
Short-lived career.
Yeah, so I think I went on to oboe then, and then I took up this saxophone, which he was against. I won't go into that, but you know, bad things happen when you play saxophone or those instruments. So. But I decided to play an instrument he didn't know too much about, so he couldn't hit my
Fair enough. Now, Bill, you started trombone at what, 15?
I started late because my father and his 8 brothers and their father and their father's father and their father's father were all musicians. So I had a different kind of encouragement, which is to say, the last thing on earth that my mother and father wanted me to do was to go into music.
Yeah, it's okay. It's just Lennie's wife just turned up.
And so I wasn't hit. I was almost prohibited.
Oh, really?
Which was a great encouragement. As a matter of fact, I recommended to all music schools these days that an instrument be hidden in the basement. People not allowed to go near it, of course, till if the children will find a way to do so, and we'll have an extraordinary number of virtuosic, exhilarated young people running around because there's a tendency for younger people to do what they can't do. Yes, I haven't convinced you, I see.
No, I'm not convinced. But when did you start running your own band? Was that during high school?
That was at the age of 15, 14, 13. It was during World War II, and all the other males who were musicians were away. And I was not of military age, so Lee Konitz and Cy Taub, the bass trumpet player, and I went to Stanton High School together. Were working jobs that we had no business working, we weren't qualified for, but of course it was a great gift to us to be able to be playing with these bands at such a young age. And I was on the road with Billy Rogers, who had played trumpet with the Woody Herman band. She was referred to as Billy Rogers, the girl trumpet player. And she had a band of 7 brass and 5 saxophones, and I was on the road as a baby, age 14 or 15. And I was larger, so I looked a little older, and so I had enormous advantages. And of course I met Lennie Tristano, which is the single greatest musical gift in my life. Lennie was a pianist of enormous skill and intelligence. And when we studied with him, he told us that he just finished reading Tolstoy's War and Peace, and he felt that he played better. So Lee and I, who were his first 2 students, rushed out and bought War and Peace. And I'm not sure whether we played better, but it was a lifelong gift to us in respect to reading, thinking.
But you know, you talk as though you just walked straight into a band at the age of 15 and started playing. It doesn't happen like that. You had to learn.
No, it was much better then. I was hired by Stan the same way. Pete Rugolo told Stan that I was 19 or 20. Said, Stan, you ought to hire Bill. I had no resume. Nobody had a resume in those days. No resume, no headshot, no description of what I did, no clippings. And Stan one day called up and said, I'd like you to join the band. I said, who is this? And I did. So things were much easier and I would say wiser.
Yeah. How old were you at that time?
I must have been 20 when Stan made that call, and I joined the band age 20 or 21.
Incredible. What about you, Lennie? How did you find out about the band? How did you know?
Somebody told Stan about me. This is in '52 when half of the band had left. Art Pepper, Bud Shank, Bob Cooper, Shelly Mann, and several others. So I would say about half the band was new.
Yeah.
So he was trying out alto players, and I was in college at the time. But somebody told him about me, and I just finished college. And somebody had told him about me, and so he asked me to come down and audition. And I told this story yesterday.
Yes, well, tell it again, come on.
Okay, maybe somebody wasn't here. So I went down to, it was a place called Florentine Gardens in Los Angeles, and I took my horn out and I got on the bandstand. He had just commissioned Jerry Mulligan to write 10 or 12 arrangements, and he called Limelight. And there was a first alto player named Dick Beldonian. The first alto player was always the lead alto player. The second alto player was a jazz alto player. And so I started playing the chart, and then I looked down, I'm glancing down, I said, oh, there's a solo coming up. And so I had this first solo. And so I played the solo, and then this was unusual, and I had heard, and I knew there was always a first and second alto, the second being the jazz player. And he said, I'd like you to play lead on Deep Purple, an arrangement that Bill Holman had written. So I played lead on Deep Purple, and so they took a break, and Stan called me over to a booth. It was a nightclub, and said he'd like me to join the band. And I have to tell the same story I told the other day, that I was 21, like about Bill was when he joined the band. And I looked up at Stan, and he was like 6'4" or something.
Wow.
You know, and I was really thrilled and excited, and he said he'd like me to play with the band. But I did think, my goodness, he's old. And then later I find out he's 39 and I'm 21, so.
But now, you joined as a player, but not a player arranger, did you?
No.
No. And what about Bill?
Well, I was hired chiefly as a composer. But
Did you have to audition?
I beg your pardon?
Did you have to audition?
No.
So you got straight in, huh?
Yes.
Ah.
Just as well. And Lennie Tristano had persuaded me that I should become a trombonist more than anything. I should become a player, an improvising player. But I really wasn't hired to do that. So I was reluctant. I was stupid beyond belief, stupid beyond my years, if you forgive me for saying. So, and I didn't want to write a piece for Stan. Here was this extraordinary orchestra. So Pete said, well, why don't you take a piece that you've done and recast it, restructure it, reorchestrate it. So I did. I took Solitaire, which I had written 3 years before, and wrote it for the Innovations Orchestra. I think I had to make a couple of trips to the library and find out a couple of things that I hadn't been taught, because in my day we were all woefully unschooled. There was no literature of jazz pedagogy. You had little, no. You had very little also. There wasn't a lot, though.
No.
And I studied a lot of scores, a lot of Stravinsky and a lot of Bach. But anyway, I put together this piece, and it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad.
Solitaire
Yes.
wasn't when you wrote as Solitaire. It was written as something else, wasn't it?
It was called Falstaff originally, and Michael Spark persuaded me that the original title would have been better, but there it is. It's my opus 1.
Is it? Did you often do that? Did you often change titles, compositions, to fit the situation?
No.
No.
No, I think that wasn't a bad change. In fact, I wish Stan had intervened more frequently, because I had a team ear about the titles. I mean, calling a piece Egdon Heath, based on a plot of land in a Thomas Hardy novel, was not exactly the way to engage an audience. Ellington taught me more about titles, and Stan did. Stan was good. Stan, in a funny way, was careful with me, almost too careful, too delicate, and protective. He had to be protective.
Yeah. But are titles important? I mean, do they matter?
Oh, crucial.
Really?
Don't you think so?
Yeah, definitely.
A great title is almost, and Stan knew this, a great title is almost better than the piece. It's almost more important than the piece. It attracts attention. It tells the audience that you're in tune with them, that you want to please them, that there's something to listen for other than an abstract succession of notes. I think great, and I can't come up with many. Well, I wrote a piece called Roadrunner. Recently I wrote another piece called The Hornblower. Those are a little better, I think. More active.
What about you? Do you consciously think of a title?
Sometimes I start, I think most of us do, we start to write and then think of a title after. But very rarely I come up with a title and then it would get me going. But getting back to, I have some arrangements that are published, and I look at it, at the list of tunes that I've written and what's selling, and something is selling like a lot of copies, and I think Bill is right. The title has a lot to do with the composition. Because why is this musically better than this one? It's just selling half as much as this one, and it's got to be the title. But Bill came up with some great titles. I think he did, unless Stan did it for you. Oh, what I did. 4 views of something, or 2 views.
A theme of 4 values.
A theme of 4 values. That's it.
Well, start any.
No, when I joined the band, Bill was on the band. We had been on for just a short time then.
1950. January.
I joined in
52.
52, yeah.
I still think of you as a newcomer.
Lennie, you touched on your draft, the fact that you were forced to go into the army. Was the army, wasn't it? Yes?
Yes, we are.
And that's where you met Clint. Can you expand a little on that? I mean, how did you happen to meet him, and how did you meet the people you did meet when you were in the army? The third part, was that desperately important, joining the army? Because if you hadn't done so, would you not have made those connections?
How did I meet Clint?
Yeah.
Oh, I went through basic training and you know, in basic training you learn how to shoot the rifle and all that. And one of the things that we had to do was go to the swimming pool and dive off a high board. I don't know what purpose this was, except that maybe if they're sending you overseas, you have to jump overboard, and you had to jump down, and I was a terrible swimmer. But I jumped off the tall diving board, and you swim across to the side, and Clint was sitting there, and he was there to save the guys that jumped off the diving board and didn't come up. So anyway, he had worked, I didn't know that, but I was working clubs with a quartet and a quintet and an octet. And I worked what was called non-commissioned officers clubs with the quartet and quintet, and I worked the octet. I worked at the officers club, and he was a bartender at the non-commissioned officers club, and he was a jazz fan. As a kid, he used to go see. He grew up in Oakland, and he used to see jazz at the Philharmonic, and so he came up and we started talking about jazz, and you know, he asked me, did you see the one with Bird when he played Lady Be Good? I said, yeah, I saw that at the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and he said he saw it in Oakland. And so we got to know each other, and I used to go to a jam session in Santa Cruz, which is about 30 miles from Fort Ord on Sunday. He'd come in. But anyway, after the Army, he went his way, went to do Rawhide, and I went right back with Stan. The Lee Konitz had left, and in 1954 went back with Stan to 59, so we didn't really catch up to each other till later.
Did you, with your meeting of Clint and the fact that you did knock around together, did you have any intimation of things to come? Did you think that you may work with him one day?
No idea, no. I started out as an arranger, as an orchestrator for a very fine composer named Jerry Fielding, who wrote for a lot of different directors. He did 4 films for Clint, and he worked for I guess he's an English director, Michael Winter.
Yeah, we know him.
And a
very popular man.
Oh, is that a wrong sad thing to mention? And a Czechoslovakian man who lived in England. He did a movie called The Gambler, and but anyway, we did a lot of movies, and I was his orchestrator. And then later, Clint called me, and I didn't tell Clint when he did or tell Jerry that when he did the Clint Eastwood movies that I knew Clint. I wasn't keeping it from him, but I walked into the date as orchestrator to be sure everything was going okay, and he wanted me there. And I walk in, I saw Clint there, I'm sitting next to him, and he's standing there at the podium conducting, and he looks around, and here his orchestrator is sitting with the star there, and laughing and joking, and he's wondering what's going on. He should be in the booth and listening, checking out the notes. So anyway, after a while, Clint started calling me to do his movies in 1984. I've been doing most of his movies since then.
Yes, yes, we know. Well, back to Kenton for the moment. We'll get back to Clint later on. Bill, did Stan ever interfere with your arranging? Did he ever disagree with what you'd done? And was there ever a conflict? Because he was an arranger himself. Was there ever a conflict between the arrangements of you both?
Well, not enough.
The master of the pause.
No, I was very set on a jazz orchestral concept, maybe parallel to Dizzy's big band, in which a very jazzistic, soloistic idea is applied to a large jazz orchestra. But as with Dizzy's band, it wouldn't have worked. I mean, I wrote the pieces. I think they were as successful as Dizzy's pieces. And I only heard them played once. Stan would play them one time. And I heard them played brilliantly because the band was such a brilliant band. So he did veto me there very clearly. And he did lead me into thinking more about the audience. I think the reason for my answer, though, is that I think he should have pushed me around a little more, and he didn't have to do this with Pete Rugolo, partly because Pete was so kind and compassionate and easygoing and better schooled than I was. But I would have liked a little more guidance. However, I should say that the thing that he gave me, which should be mentioned at a conference like this, is a sense of my responsibility. He wanted me to write ballets. He wanted me to write opera. He wanted me to know Leonard Bernstein. He wanted me to do a lot of things that people in the band then and now probably think of as fancy. But he felt that we were artists and that we should try to reach as wide a part of the world as possible. So he didn't want us to be limited. And he was especially intense in this respect with me, not so much at that moment, but in implying what I should do in the future. And as a result, I became an educator. I'm the head of a music department. I teach in Palermo at La Scuola Europea, and I've written a variety of works in different styles. I've hardly done any commercial work, partly because I think I'm not good at it. That's true.
Stan, I fancy that Stan might have disagreed with you there, because you were the resident intellectual when she was a band.
Yes.
And he was the self-willed man, and you were a self-willed man, so it was a clash of wills. Are you saying that you wish he'd succeeded more than he did?
Yes.
In pulling you around to commercialism?
I wish he had, I wish he had bullied me a little more, or guided me, or whatever word.
Yes. I have something to say. I think that I didn't know this. What Bill is saying is new to me, because there are relationships that different guys in the band have with Stan that are their own, that, are, like I had a relationship with Stan, but just listening to Bill's writing, he brought a new sound to the band. And well, Stan had at the time 10 brass and 5 saxes, and I mentioned this the other day. He hated the clarinets, so there were no doubles in the sax section, and he hated the cup mutes. And I think you'll have to agree with me that Rugolo started in some of his things to get a different color. I mean, we were going crazy. What do we do? Well, let's write a tenor or 2 tenors and 2 trombones playing a melody, an alto and 2 trumpets, and Bill used to use like 2 trumpets, one in a harmon and one in a cup mute, the dreaded cup mute, but it sounded, it was still a trumpet, but the straight mute is the loudest mute that a brass instrument can use, but the cup mute makes it softer, so it almost sounds like a different instrument. And he started a song which he called the Gazelle. I don't know where he got that from, but he left the band. He was with the band when I joined, but it was alto, 2 tenors, and a trombone. Yeah. And it was a lovely sound. And one of the, well, he used it in several arrangements. One is everybody's favorite, is Fascinating Rhythm, and which was really, as you listen to the recording, it's a marvelous recording, and it sounds like it's not difficult, but I know when I joined the band, Bill had left, and Stan would say, let's try Russo's arrangement of Fascinating Rhythm. So we tried it, and I was the lead gazelle. The alto played the melody. So I didn't have a problem, you know, I just played da 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 da. But it was all these in the rest, Bill put little punctuations, and they were always different in a different place. A bop, 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 whatever. and so you'd hear bop, 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 you know, different guys going, let's try that again. And then we sort of get through the first chorus, and then the ending, I remember it sounded like it went into a different time signature, but it was in the same time signature, but he shifted it around, and it's called, well, I call it misplacing the beat. You do a phrase, and you start it on 1, and then you do the same phrase and started on beat 8, or whatever. I really don't remember exactly what he did, and it wasn't that hard mathematically, but we couldn't play it. The band could not play it. So 4 months later, Stan said, let's try that Russo's Fascinating Rhythm. We tried again. Da 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 da. My part. Da da. You know. So we never played it.
But if there's a recording of it, which there is, I must have them among my recordings at home, mustn't I? There must be a Fascinating Rhythm. I'm going to play it when I get home and try and understand what you're talking about.
Well, when you listen to it, it's like a lot of things. It's sometimes you listen to it and you can't tell how difficult it is because you can't see what it looks like on paper. It flows so smoothly.
That's the opposite aim that composers should have. See, that's partly the problem of writing for Stan Kenton's band, because we had these wonderful players to write for, and everybody since then has been not as good. So it's true. I mean, that's true. And so I learned how to write. I just wrote whatever I wanted, and nobody ever said that's too hard.
Right.
Nobody. Once Buddy Childers, I was writing a piece for Conte Condoli called Portrait of a Count in Stan's presence. But he said, why do you put the trumpet so high? It's Conte's solo. And Stan turned to Buddy and said, would you just stop talking about this? He was very upset. So other than that, I should have had plenty of criticism, because I was writing hard things. And sometimes they sounded easy. I think I would have been much nicer to write music that sounded difficult. That was very easy.
But you know, these days, you must admit, you have a reputation for writing fairly complicated compositions, don't you?
That's true.
Mm.
But they sound easy.
You learned your lesson.
Lennie, can we hark back to the question I asked Bill earlier, which is about Stan's interference or vetoing of your work? Did you find he vetoed your work to any large extent?
No. I was on the band. The first arrangement I wrote was Pennies from Heaven. Well, I listening to all the arrangements that Rugolo, we were still playing Rugolos and Bills. And we go to a dance and we play Bob Grettinger's arrangements of You Go to My Head. And there were people out there, we played dances and concerts, but these were dances. And Stan wrote Under a Blanket of Blue, Street of Dreams, We Sang September Song.
Oh, yes.
We remember that, don't we?
Do you?
It got in the hit parade, didn't it?
Yeah. We No Vibrato and sing in tune, whatever. and then he tried it again with, what was it, Laura?
Maybe so.
And it bombed. Explain that. They sang just as bad as they did on September song. But anyway, I thought, gee, he's got, these arrangements of Mulligan, but he can't play a dance. So my first arrangement was Pennies from Heaven. And I said, I have to get it to sound like it's Jack Kenton with a trombone sound. And I came up with a sound, well, I didn't come up with it, but Stan's arrangements were always the same voicing. It was, I don't want to get technical, but he skipped the second harmony part, and it went down from there. So you had the low, the fourth tenor or the second tenor, and the baritone way down. When the lead melody got low, everybody got real low. Everybody got really muddy down there, and that was his voicing. So I started Pennies from Heaven in fourths. I spread out the harmony, and so I did that, and I used the trombone sound, and that Stan did on September Song after we sang that unison part, and I wrote a solo for Conte Condoli, and so the people were able to dance to it, but it still sounded like Kenton, and so he liked it.
Yeah. And
so that sort of, I continued along those lines. I did write a couple things. I wrote a thing called Bird House, H-A-U-S, Niehaus. And he changed it for solo to alto, I hear, when I went into the Army and gave it to Lee Conant to play. So it became solo for alto. But I did write some jazz things. And I wrote some vocals for the vocalist at the time, Jerry Winters. And then when I got back with the band, I continued writing, whatever. And I don't know if Stan ever did this with you, but he left Holman in New York City to write the contemporary concepts. And I think he wrote, he left it there for 2 weeks. And then one day he came to my seat in the bus and said, I'd like you to stay in Chicago and write this album called Stage Door Swings. And so I wrote, in those days it was a 12-inch album, and you did 12 tunes. So a little funny story, we do these Kenton tributes, and there was a panel, and there was a arranger that had been with Stan later in the late 60s or something, and Stan sent him home for 3 weeks to write 3 arrangements. So I had to say, Stan left me in Chicago, and I wrote for 3 weeks, and I wrote 12 arrangements. and Holman did the same thing. But that was when he felt that somebody should get off the band, because I did a lot of writing, and I built it on the bus and with a
Hotel.
trying to figure out, the
Hotel ballrooms.
And then once in a while, I go, I don't know about you, I go to the piano before the job and see, did I really mean this, or does it sound like it does? And what, is that on the line or in the space, or whatever the flux is going, And then, by the end of the gig, I forgot what I had in mind if I stopped what I was doing, and but anyway, I wrote a lot of arrangements on the bus, and I think most of us did our writing on the bus, because we had to keep doing the one-nighters. It's that, Holman was the first one. I remember him keeping in the city.
Yeah, he sent me home once.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, we were near Chicago.
How many did you do? How long did he give you the ticket?
I think I did one a month.
One a month? Well,
I had a better deal.
that other guy, the other guy beat you then. He did one a week. So.
Why did he send you home, though?
Well, to write.
Just to write?
Just to compose, yes. I think this was the basis for, Egham, he's, the bass, study for bass, I can't remember the name of the album, because they've changed since then. What? Showcase.
Showcase.
Yes, I guess.
Hey, why is it? Good props.
He wrote a thing called improvisation, which I really enjoyed playing. And I played the first alto solo, and then Charlie would come out and join me. And it was like my influences were Charlie Parker and Lee Holness. So it was a mixture, and Charlie was Bird. And so when he came out, it was like, I wouldn't say Beauty and the Beast, but there was a, simultaneous improvisation in a, well, I do it today with a friend of mine. I do some CDs, and we try to listen to each other and make it compositional. But with Charlie, it was sort of, so I tried to play like him, and I couldn't play like, Stan would go up after he played a hot solo, he'd take his handkerchief. We always had to wear the white handkerchief, the black socks, and he wiped his horn off. He got pretty funky, as they say. But that was an interesting arrangement or composition.
We've spoken from time to time over the past couple of days about the vocalists, not at great length, and I suppose the favourite must have been June Christie. Now, you and June were fairly close, weren't you, Bill?
What's the noun? What's the noun? What's the subject of the previous sentence?
June Christie.
Yes.
Right. She used to call you Orson, didn't she?
Yes, she did.
Right. Was it because you were both artistic, in an artistic sort of way? Did she gravitate towards you?
Well,
What's the noun?
this is often the case in my life. I've been a total embarrassment to myself. And here I was, very green, very wet behind the ears, as my Uncle Frank used to say, and he loved me. Awkward and reading Tolstoy and interested in books and movies and plays and so on and so forth. And she was very kind, very compassionate. She liked that about me. And in the way she gave me her protection. She saw that I was awkward and that I had difficulty relating to some of the more strong-minded, free-spirited ravers in that band. And she acted as my protector. And then she was interested in some of the things that I was interested in. And she thought it was cute. I've seen pictures of me, and there's that little mustache like this. It's so embarrassing.
Yes, well,
I remember that.
Yes.
what was her best era, the times that she was with Kenton? When did you admire her singing most?
I liked her after Anita O'Day, that is before before 1950. And I loved June very much. But in a way, she never quite fit that band in the way that Anita O'Day did. And Anita O'Day may have been the only person who fit that band. I mean, how would you fit that band? You'd have to be Mahalia Jackson. I mean, that's not fitting either. That would overwhelm the band. But a certain fragility about June's voice that I thought was always threatened by the band. You know, her biggest influence was Louis Armstrong. Yes. So she was a thinking person, and she gave a great deal of thought to the subject. I love the thing she did with Pete Rubin.
Oh,
Come
yes.
On, Be Happy.
Oh, yes.
Remember that?
Wonderful.
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 Lennie, you jumped earlier on from being with Stan to working for Clint. But was it a wrench to leave Stan and write for television and films, especially for Clint? Well, did you regret having to leave Stan? Or was it a big decision?
I enjoyed playing. I loved playing with the band. but I didn't like being on the road. I didn't like the trips, and I had been on the band for 5 years, and I remember going up to Stan. I think it was at the Blue Note in Chicago, and saying, "Stan, I think I'm going to leave the band." And he said, "Why?" I said, "Well, I've been with the band for 5 years, and I think it's time to go back to town and try some other things." You know, he said, because he had been with he had the band since what, 1941, and this is like 1959. And Bob Chioga had been on the band even after I joined. He was still in the band. So I just wanted to get home. We had a little girl, my wife and I, a 3-year-old, and I was on the road. Well, not as much as some of his bands, because the ballrooms were closing and the jazz clubs were closing. So we'd go out for 6 months and back for 3 months, then out again. But I wanted to stay home, and I wanted to write music more and get into whatever.
Sure.
So I felt, I did. Like I say, I loved playing with the band. I mean, the trips, some of the trips we would leave, we would play a job and leave the job and get on the bus and get to the job an hour before in the next town and change our uniforms on the bus. And everybody was tired, aggravated, and bad-tempered. But when Stan got out there, it was a concert. And Stan came out and he waved those big arms, and like Leslie said, his daughter said, you know, it still sends chills down her spine when she thinks about it.
Yeah.
But when, you know, we're all tired, as soon as he gave that downbeat, I mean, the whole band came alive. You know, we hadn't slept, and we were tired and all that, but the band swung like crazy. We had some good rhythm section with Mel Lewis, and those were the perks of being with the band. But, you know, the traveling and all that was, you know.
Did he understand your reasons, or was he angry or disappointed?
Well, actually he didn't know. He thought, you know, why do you want to, he wanted me to stay with the band.
Yeah, right.
And it was hard to explain. I had studied composition, and I didn't even think of movies.
No.
And I just wanted to go home and write. And actually, I started what I call the vaudeville shows. Carol Burnett, you know, and Dean Martin were, you know, they had a singer and jugglers and all that. So, but I really learned a lot from doing those shows, because in doing movies, they'll come up with any kind of things. And so they asked, can you write a this or can you write a that? So I learned, and especially with Clint being a big jazz fan, he likes to, if it's a type of movie that he can't put jazz in, he likes jazz in a score.
Yeah.
If it's a source, it's something coming out of a jukebox or a band playing, he'll have a jazz tune. And so I hooked up with a good guy in that area, and I did the movie Bird, and as I said before, he was one of my biggest idols. And the script had been sitting at Columbia, and they were going to get Richard Pryor to play Bird. Well, you know, everybody would laugh, because whatever he did, if he did some funny face, they would think it was going to be funny. So Clint came up with the idea of getting an unknown.
Forrest Whitaker?
Forrest Whitaker, right.
It was terrific.
And that's also, I had stopped playing for a while, and that got me playing again, because I had to teach him how to play or how to pretend to play. But I got him to play, and knowing Bird, he was moving his shoulders, and I said, Bird used to play like his shoes were nailed to the ground, you know, don't move. And I was sort of not only the composer of whatever cues there were, but I isolated, well, there was another thing, and I don't want to take my time up because this is about Stan, but trying to find a sound alike and then Clint came up with the idea of isolating Bird's solos from recordings he had done. And he found a bunch of recordings from Chan, as one of his wives, and they were recorded at Carnegie Hall with a string quartet. It was recorded so badly, but Bird was right out in front. So we were able to get all that out, and I wrote a rhythm section over all the isolated solos, and I got a 20-piece string section. So we covered anything that leaked, and so that was really one of the thrills of my life. But to do that movie, and so, but you know, it's like, what is that? One door closes, another door opens.
Oh, sure.
Hopefully. But I've heard somebody say, yeah, but that next door might be, I can't say what he said.
So, Bill, back to the original premise. What was Stan's attitude when you told him you were going?
Who would stand up?
What was Stan's attitude when you told him you were leaving?
Oh, he was very upset. I think, as he was with Lennie. And speaking as a band leader, what I am now, I can understand it. You want your people to stay with you as long as you want them. If you fire them, that's okay. But you don't want them to go away. You want them to stay. And in a way, Stan was typical. If somebody left the band, that person didn't exist almost.
Really?
Yes. I mean, didn't. There was no existence. For example, we'd play, and one of the trombone players would be sick. And we wouldn't replace the person. That was typical, because the band was so, you couldn't just walk into Stan's band and begin to play one of the chairs. The only exception might be the drummer or a bass player, which you couldn't perform without those two instruments. But we played, well, one time we played 3 or 4 nights without me, because I had terrible earache. And then somebody would say, but there's Ted so-and-so, he used to be with the band. Stan would say, no, no.
Really?
He wouldn't fill the chair with somebody who had been with the band. And it wasn't out of anger. It was that, in a way, that person had just moved into a different area. And, you know what I mean to say? It's not a criticism of Stan. It's a very understandable human response. He's not one of us anymore. And we were, and us. You know, we were a gestalt. We were an entity. No, he was upset, and I probably shouldn't have done it. I also wanted to study. And I was tired. Although I think I was less on the road than you, because I was being sent places to park fairly frequently. But I very much wanted to study, and I think I wasn't happy. But I should have stayed another year or so.
So you did partially regret leaving, yes?
Oh yes.
I have. I don't know. I wasn't there, but the same thing when Bill Holman left the band. I understand, and I don't know what reason Willis gave, but he said, well, what do you want? You know, am I not asking you to write enough arrangements? He said, no, I'm writing plenty. I'm perfectly happy with that. He said, well, do you want to play more tenor solos? He said, no, I've got my tenor solos, but he wanted to leave. So Bill's right when he said he just didn't like the idea of somebody that he was happy with the band leaving, because it became a part of the family. And you know, you get a new person in, even if they're a great player, you have to say, yeah, that's great, but we play like this. Like there was a trombone song, I'm sure Milt will tell you about it in an hour, right? And there was a sax song. Stan used to say, I think this is after you left, he'd say, no vibrato and cold. And, but we cheated. We still played with a little vibrato, and Lee did the same thing,
Yes.
you know. But to him, that was no vibrato, you know. If you don't get that, what I call the Hollywood sound that saxophone players used to play with, where they used to count a number of times their lower loops would go up and down, like Glenn Miller, you know. But I mean, you can play a little vibrato, like it's considered a jazz vibrato, and he would say, no vibrato and cool or cold or whatever, and we'd say, okay, and then we'd play our own way. But he never said anything.
So, we're very nearly at the end of the hour. What I want to know now is what you two go back to when this weekend's over. Bill, you first. You mentioned something about Palermo.
Well, I teach in Palermo, and when the lira improves slightly. Am I audible?
Yeah, take a drink of water, it'll go over. We got on the phone to Heathrow, but they don't understand.
There's a school in Palermo that has it's for all members of the Common Market EU, and it's subsidized by the EU. In the first 2 years, we've only had Italian students, which is because they pay your transportation there, pay your room and board, and give you a stipend. And the English language is supposed to be the language that's taught, but in fact, we have only Italian students. And I had the great pleasure of teaching in Italian, which is not my native language, even though I heard it a little bit when I was a child, so it was a very educational experience. For me, they're wonderful players, these Italian players, and we performed 2 or 3 concerts down there. And my orchestra is going to perform this summer in Perugia. We performed last year and the year before in Italy. And I'm writing a piece for a solo trumpet based on Gregorian chant.
Good.
So I'm busy.
Is that your thing for the future, this Gregorian chant? Do you think it is something that you can spend a lot of time with?
I'm not sure about it. It's hard. It's hard to find the right melodies. And the hardest part of composing, I think we just discussed this in a different context before, is getting started, isn't it?
Oh,
I mean, getting not the idea, but just getting the matrix, getting the template, because it changes so much in these days.
So, Lennie, what about you? We're very grateful that you found time between films to come and see us.
Yeah,
so what do you go back to?
I'm going back. It's being negotiated now, but Clint has finished a film, and it's called Space Cowboys, and it's not a Western.
Space Cowboys.
Space Cowboys.
Uh-huh.
It's about 4 guys that have retired from the Air Force, and they went out into space, and the mission had to be aborted. Something went wrong, but they fixed it, and now these guys are out. They retired. It's Tommy Lee Jones and Donald Sutherland and James Garner and Clint. And so they decide, well, let's get these guys back to do it, because they did it once, but we had to bring them back. So, listening to Bill, you sit there, well, there are synthesizer writers now, and people ask me, how do you write? And I say, well, I use a pencil, and I make sure it has an eraser on the end, and I use a sketch pad, where some guys look at the screen and the picture, and they fake their way through, and the thing appears on a screen, and I have to admit, technically, I don't know how to do that, and I don't want to know how to do that. I did a movie called Lush Life. It had nothing to do with the song Strayhorn, but it was about 2 jazz musicians, and Forrest Whitaker played a trumpet player in this, and Jeff Goldblum played a tenor player, and so it was nominated for an Emmy. It was a cable show. It was nominated for an Emmy, and I was sitting there with my wife, and they had these guys that do these things. Hollywood composer. I'm sitting there just enjoying myself and enjoying the food and all that, and thinking, I'll never get it, And they called my name, and I didn't have a speech prepared. I won the Emmy, and I got up. But I remember, and there was a girl named, Jeff Goldblum and Forrest Whitaker, and I still can't remember her name. Diane, she was in picket fences, but Kathy Baker, her name was, and I was going to say Kathy Bates, and I knew that was the heavy lady. That was another, and I said, and it was a pleasure working with Forrest and Jeff and Kathy, and I'm standing there. There's 2 tables full of Showtime people. They're saying, Baker. So I said Baker. Anyway, I remember saying at the end, and I want to thank all the acoustic jazz musicians throughout the world. I don't think that went over with them. I mean, in Hollywood, anybody over 30 or 35, you know, you're united through loud guitars and synthesizers. But anyway, but starting with the paper, but saying, you know, thinking like, well, right there I hear this and I hear that. Yeah, that sounds good. And you think of all these things to say, you know. And then I get in my car and I said, I don't know what I got to write. You know? But I said these things and he seems to like them, you know, and you make up these things. And so, anyway, that's my future.
Well, Forrest Whitaker is going to be, if he carries on like this, he's going to be the only multi-instrumentalist who can't play an instrument. Yeah. Very good. Can I just round off by just quoting an instant here? I had a letter a little while ago from a chap called Arthur Frankham, who lives in Norris Green, Liverpool. And he said, I've collected Stan Kenton ephemera for years, and having heard you talk about him on the air, I thought you'd like a letter I got from him way back. It says very little, but what it says is pertinent, I think. Stan Kenton Orchestra, La Cienega, is that where they live? Hollywood, California? However, there we are.
Oh, La Cienega.
Oh, well, thank you. Yes. Mr. Arthur Frankham, Norris Green, Liverpool. Dear Arthur, and it's signed Stan Kenton. And I asked Leslie, she said, that's his signature. She said, I know, because I used to forge it so many times. Dear Arthur, just a few lines to acknowledge your enthusiastic letter that's just arrived. I'm glad you got to visit with Vic Lewis. We all cherish not only what he's done in England, but his friendship as well. No one hopes more than we do to someday visit England. Thank you again for writing. Sincerely, Stan Kenton. April the 10th, 1951, nearly 50 years ago. Half a century, and what a lot has happened over that time. Bill, Lennie, thank you very much.